Hello, everyone. It's time for our midweek message. So, this week we're going to talk about the gospel story that we're going to be reading on Sunday. And I just have to tell you, the Bible is a book. It's got it all. It's got adventure, romance, horror. It's got quests. It's got surprise endings. You name it. You can find it somewhere in the Bible's pages. And our story for Sunday is definitely one of those stories. It's remarkable in both good and bad ways. It's offensive. It is. It's got an epiphany. There is a healing that takes place. There is an extremely smart woman in there. There's a lot of things to learn from it. So read it and be disturbed. It is Mark 7, verses 24 to 37. So Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 37. There's a lot for us to learn there. I am going to read, you're going to recognize it, and I'm going to read some of the important verses in context, but I hope you do go and read the whole thing. So this is from the wonderful, wonderful Suzanne Guthrie from her website, Edge of the Enclosure. She says, "Not worthy to gather up the crumbs. He said to her," and so this is Mark 7, 27 and 28. This is sort of the crux of this story. He said to her, that's Jesus, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Suzanne goes on to say, "It's not fashionable to cower before the divine presence. That's good in one way. For generations, 'I'm not worthy' became an excuse for not taking risks on behalf of the gospel and acting on behalf of justice and peace in the world. On the other hand, there's a kind of arrogance in current cultural Christianity that postures, 'I'm forgiven once and for all, so my exploitation of others in my acquisition of material things doesn't count against me. I focus my sole attention to my own personal salvation, and everyone else be damned. God gave me dominion over creation, so I'll ravage it for all that I need now because heaven will be awesome when my time comes. I am totally worthy.'" She goes on to say, "You know the kind of thinking that I mean." Both Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross suggest that the closer you come to mystical union, the more is at stake in terms of the consequences of sin and temptation, to the world around you as much as to yourself. A characteristic of the mystical path is an ever-widening sphere of love of God and neighbor. The Syrian woman shatters Jesus' exclusionary mindset, and she does not cower before Jesus, but she also appreciates that what she was asking for. He says, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she replies, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." She is a woman. She is a foreigner, a pagan, unclean. He belongs to the chosen people. She has means, independence, and a crackling intelligence. He is an illegitimate, itinerant rabbi. She has a daughter possessed by a demon. She needs him. He is on a purposeful but limited mission. She is everything he most despises and fears. He's in for a major breakthrough. So thank you, Suzanne Guthrie. That is such a wonderful, wonderful passage. And it really, I hope that it enlightened you as much as it enlightened me. Now, one more quote, just because I want to get your creative juices flowing. This is from Heidi Husted from the Christian Century. And she says, "In any case, the woman does not back down. Dog, indeed. She keeps right on nipping at Jesus' heels, which showcases not only her debating skills, but her faith. She dares to take his metaphor and turn it back on him. Children get fed before the dogs. You got that right, Lord, but even the dogs get to eat the children's crumbs. Even the pets get the scraps that fall from their master's table." She is arguing that even on his own terms, there should be something from him, some scrap of grace for someone like her who comes to him in faith and she is challenging him. What are you going to do, Lord? Judge me by my externals only, or judge me by my heart? The day the gospel went to the dogs was the day it came to us. We are some of the dogs who have received the good news of the gospel. When Jesus opened himself up to mission to the whole world, he opened his church to the world. Now we are to open ourselves to the whole world in mission. Thank you, Heidi Husted. That is also a wonderful and thought-provoking quote. So I hope those quotes gave you some insight into our gospel story this Sunday, which was actually called by my New Testament professor when I was in seminary, Jesus' conversion experience. It was the moment where he went from being a guy who thought he knew what God wanted him to do to realizing that what God wanted was a whole lot bigger than what he first envisioned as a Jewish man in the Roman Empire. Much, much bigger. This is the moment where he embraced God's vision for everyone and all of creation, and not just for the Jewish people. Now, I want you to know that Mark is the first gospel that was written. They think it was written around 50 BCE, which CE, the Common Era. So, or 50 AD, depending on what you're used to, CE or AD, it's basically the same thing. And we hear in this gospel someone who actually knew Jesus, who actually walked with Jesus, someone who saw him grow and question things and change and then grow some more. So the first gospel is a lot more raw and has a sense of immediacy and has a lot less of a theological agenda than the later gospels. And notably, the synoptic gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they are all like Matthew and Luke are based on Mark's writing. So is John, but to a lesser degree, because John was the last of the Gospels to be written. Anyway, I digress. This story that we're reading this week, this is one of those stories where we get to see that growth that Jesus has happened. But I want to point out that we also see Jesus' willingness to listen and to consider what this woman says in spite of all of the things that would make that difficult. And I want to point out the fact that she was female and she was barging into this completely male setting. She was a Gentile. She was considered unclean. She was considered an unbeliever. And she, worse, had an unclean, and as the way they looked at it back then, she had a daughter that was possessed by a demon. She didn't know what the protocol was. And she made a spectacle of herself in the middle of what was basically a lecture. I could go on, but I know you get the point. It would be really difficult to see the person that she was and the needs that she had past all of the offensive things that she represented in that context, in that room. And the etiquette that she abrogated in running in there in the way that she did. And I want to point out that I am not trying to soften the fact that he called her an ethnic slur. Calling her a dog back then was basically, that was it was a very unfortunately common ethnic slur that was used. I can't soften that, and I won't. I am offended every time I read it. But I also see the miracle that Jesus learned, that Jesus listened to her. Notably, he also conceded the argument to her. And I want to point out that is a really big deal. It is the only time in the book of Mark where Jesus concedes an argument, where he is not the victor in any debate that he has with anyone. And he does heal her daughter. So there's a lot to consider in this story. This is a story that is really rich on so many levels. And in so many ways, I find this a hopeful story. Because even God, in the form of Jesus, can learn, can change, can grow, can be open and listen. And if God can do that, then by glory, I think we can too. The impulse to pull away and to shut her down had to be so strong. And yet he listened to her. He looked into her eyes, he heard her, and he healed her daughter. And he conceded an argument to a woman. Hopeful stuff that models some behavior that I hope that we can learn by example to adopt, like listening. listening with an open mind and heart, like not pulling away, which is very easy to do when we are alarmed or when we find somebody objectionable, like acting on the need and the truth of an oppressed and suffering person, acting, not just listening, but acting on that, relieving that suffering. So read the story with me. Go get that Bible. Go read the story with me. Be offended. Be amazed. This story has it all. Grow and change, and like Jesus, have an epiphany. Let God's much bigger, much more inclusive and wide-ranging love catch you up in the dream that God has for us and for our world to be healed and restored and liberated. Because that is part of what God is calling us as a community and us as individuals to do. And have courage when you have something to say to God. That desperate, brilliant woman sassed Jesus. She sassed him, and she turned his argument on its head. And he clearly respected her for that. I hope he was grateful to her. Frankly, I hope he apologized, but we'll never know. But I know that I am grateful to her. I am, because she was the one who helped Jesus to see the worthiness of all people and the worthiness of all creation. That's really big stuff. So have courage when you pray. You can say anything and know that God is listening. So until next week, and in this together with you as always, Reverend Stephanie signing off.